Good evening, and welcome to the League of Women Voters of Hingham's 2015 Annual Town Meeting Warrant Review. I'm Eva Marks, a member of the Hingham League Steering Committee, together with Kate Boland, Erica Sweeney, and Kathy Salisbury. And I want to extend a special thanks to Erica, who organized this meeting tonight. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that seeks to encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government. We do this through voter education, promoting voter registration, and advocacy based on in-depth studies of issues. Town meeting, which this year is scheduled to begin on April 27th, is Hingham's legislative body. We have open town meeting. This means that anyone registered to vote in Hingham is eligible to attend and vote. The League sponsors this annual review of the Hingham Town Meeting warrant to inform voters about upcoming issues and to prepare them for this opportunity to influence those issues. The League also sponsors an annual candidates night in anticipation of the town election. Mark your calendars now for the candidates night here at Town Hall on Wednesday, April 9th. The town election will take place on the Saturday after town meeting on May the 2nd this year. At the 2011 annual town meeting, Hingham voters approved an article brought by the League of Women Voters to have the town meeting warrant made available to the public 10 days after the January 20th deadline for article submission. Those articles are posted on the Hingham Town website, which I encourage you to visit. I also encourage you to visit the Hingham League website, where you can find a citizen's guide to town meeting, as well as abundant information about Hingham Town government. Tonight, I'm pleased to welcome Mary Power, Chair of the Hingham Advisory Committee, who's going to give us an overview of how the town meeting warrant is developed and what we can expect to be brought before the town meeting. She will also answer questions that her presentation might generate. We hope this will help you when you attend town meeting on April 27th as an informed voter. Thank you.
Eva, thank you very much, and thank you very much to the League of Women Voters for once again sponsoring tonight's meeting. The advisory committee is really grateful to all the great work that the League does for the town, and in particular, a lot of the work towards giving the warrant visibility. That helps our job, it helps our process, it helps make for a more informed and participative town meeting. And I know that's something that all of us find is very important. Tonight, with some guidance from Eva and others, I've prepared a presentation that hopefully is going to stimulate a little bit of a conversation. So I would invite questions and comments as we're walking through. What I'd like to cover tonight really are four things. I'd like to give you an update on the fiscal 2016 budget. So that's the budget we'll be voting at town meeting this year that covers July 1st, 2015 through June 30th, 2016. We'll talk about the warrant article process and calendar, and talk about some selected warrant articles that will be coming before this meeting. And lastly, closing with some questions. The advisory committee has really three important budget responsibilities. We review, we vet, and we make recommendations to town meeting on all our town budgets. I think 44 in all. So that includes budget for the police department, for GAR Hall, for elder services, for the transfer station, and for snow and ice removal, which is going to be a big one this year. We also make a recommendation on the education budget, which is the largest budget in the town, and we make recommendations really working closely with the Capital Outlay Committee for capital purchases. How do we do this? As an advisory committee, we work hard to not only understand the numbers, but really what priorities exist for a department and what sort of services they'd like to provide to the community. We focus on significant changes, either changes causing the numbers to go up or changes to causing the numbers to go down. As we're looking at the financial impact, we're not just looking at fiscal year 16, but we're really looking 5 years out. We understand with the constraints imposed by Proposition 2.5 that we have a responsibility to recommend budgets that are not only sustainable for next year, but for future years. And as you'll see in a minute, that's going to be a little bit of a challenge for Hingham. We also want to make sure that in our approach, we demonstrate fairness, balance, equity, and I'd add one more, which is objectivity. Ideally, when the advisory committee recommends a budget at town meeting, it reflects a consensus, it balances affordable costs with acceptable service levels, and it involves the support of not just the advisory committee, but the Board of Selectmen, the school committee, and all originating groups. When we look at a budget, we think about budget trends within the department, we think about what it means for services, and we think about its impact on our overall financial health, most particularly our bond rating. Hingham is one of a select few AAA bond communities in the Commonwealth, and that's something that is both very important for us and very helpful. As an example, as we go out to fund debt on big projects right now, because of our AAA bond rating, we enjoy a long-term interest rate of somewhere in the 2 to 2.5% range. So obviously this is an important consideration. Down at the bottom in the table, you'll see 3 important metrics that on the advisory committee we consider our barometers. Unassigned fund balance, that's another way of saying our rainy day fund. We've been given the guidance that our rainy day fund should be anywhere between 16 to 20% of our total expenses. And as of the close of the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2014, you'll see that our actual was 20.1%. Some of you who have attended this forum in the past would remember that 6 years ago, that number was 8.96%. Through a lot of cooperation, a lot of hard work, and a lot of discipline, as a town, we've worked together to improve our fund balance. And that has helped reaffirm our rating with the bond agencies, the rating services. The other one is capital outlay. So capital outlay is purchasing, police cars and technology for schools, vehicles down at the DPW. And what we try to do every year is allot between 2 and 5% of our operating budget to capital. This year, you'll see that capital expenditures are about 3.6%. So again, that's well within the range. As we look to evaluate this year's capital budget, we're going to look to see where we are. And then lastly, debt service. Our financial policy calls for our debt service over time to be between 5 and about 7.5% of our expenses. Now you'll notice that in FY15, we're up a little bit over 10%. And it's not unusual for communities like Hingham to see fluctuation in debt service, particularly when we take on a new project. FY15 is the first year that the debt service on the middle school is reflected in these numbers. Now that's going to go down over time, but certainly as we look at financing new projects, we pay attention to the impact on debt service. Just as a little bit of context, this is a graph that shows our revenue growth, and the bars that you see in the red are the last 5 years. And what you notice about those 5 graphs is that on average, our revenue has been growing by about 4% for the last 5 years. And that's a combination of Prop 2.5 plus new growth plus state aid plus local receipts. Now, if you look at the gray bars, those include the current fiscal year and our forecast for the next 5 years. And what you notice is that our revenue growth is slowing down a little bit. And that's primarily a function of 2 things. The first is new growth is slowing down. We've completed the build out on the shipyard. We've completed a number of other projects. So our new growth is slowing down. We also right now are forecasting that our state aid is going to be flat. And actually on March 4th, Governor Baker will be delivering his budget to the legislature, and we'll have a sense of where local aid is coming. But as we look at the current year state budget situation, we think a conservative approach is flat local aid. So if you think about that, what that means is that every year we have to deliver a balanced budget to town meeting. So that means where in the past we've been able to introduce budgets that maybe have about a 4% growth, you're going to see this year, and you're going to see in future years, that the budget growth isn't going to be able to be quite that high. This is actually a chart that shows the average growth rate in some of our departments over the last 5 years. And what we've tried to do here is to give you both a percentage as well as the dollars. So for example, general government, which includes budgets for town hall, community planning, the selectman's office, over the last 5 years, that's grown on average every year by about 2.4%, which translates to about $81,000. If you notice, the largest line is, if you look on the third line, education. The education budget on average is growing by about 3.9% every year. But because that's a bigger budget, it's about $1.5 million. So again, over time, if you notice down at the bottom, for about the last 5 years, our operating budgets have been growing by about 4%, or roughly $3.2 million. As we look ahead on the advisory committee, and as we go to settle our budget on Monday, March 9th, we understand that the revenue growth projections mean that our operating budget expense increases for this next year will probably be not as significant as they've been in the past few years. And as we're looking at the budget for the next year, this is just a summary of capital spending. And some of you may recall that in 2010, which was a really difficult financial year for the town, we were very constrained, and we essentially said, we are only going to spend essential capital. I think that number was about $70,000. And you'll notice that in 2011, 2012, 2013, we were spending in the neighborhood of about $1 million. And what our capital outlay committee and members of our committee would say is, while we may have kind of slowed down our capital spending, our assets were still getting older. And the trucks were on the road a little bit longer, the equipment was being used. And you'll notice that in 2014, we got close to about $2 million. This year we're going to spend about $2.4 million in capital, and our forecast for FY16 is about $2.1 million. So where are we with the budget process right now? As of earlier this week, we right now are showing about a $2.1 million deficit. So what that means is all the requests we've gotten from different departments compared to the revenue, we've gotten requests for a little over $2 million more than available revenue. So we've got some work to do. And over the next 2 weeks, a lot of groups are going to be working at this. And what I have up there are a series of public meetings where comments, discussion from the public are most welcomed. On Monday, the school committee is going to vote its recommended budget. And after that, the education subcommittee will recommend a budget to the full advisory committee. The Board of Selectmen will vote the school budget next Thursday. And actually, we had a slight change in schedule. So instead of on March 5th, on Monday, March 9th, the advisory committee is going to vote all of the operating and capital budgets. Our goal in doing this, and the work that we have cut out for us over the next few weeks, is to arrive at budgets that where we can achieve consensus. And as has been the case in the past, it requires cooperation and good communication. And while we know we have our work cut out for us, I think we're very fortunate that we have strong working relationships between all the town departments. So we do have our work cut out for us, but I'm confident that we'll get there. So that was just a little bit of an overview on sort of the budget and the financials, which is kind of the first part of town meeting. But before talking about the warrant, were there any questions or comments about the budget? Okay. So our town meeting process, annual town meeting takes place on the fourth Monday of April, but actually our town meeting process begins much, much earlier on. You'll notice at the top of the slide that we have a number of departments and boards that often generate warrant articles for consideration by town meeting. That can include the Board of Selectmen, the Planning Board, the Community Preservation Committee, other town departments, and then we also have citizen petitions. A citizen petition basically requires 10 signatures for something to appear on the warrant. Town meeting this year will be considering 2 citizen petitions. Those are delivered to the Assistant Town Administrator. The Board of Selectmen hears and makes recommendations on all of the warrant articles with the exception of planning and zoning articles. The Advisory Committee hears and makes recommendations on every warrant article. In fact, it's the recommendation of the Advisory Committee that comes before town meeting. During that process, we work very closely with the Assistant Town Administrator, the Town Moderator, Town Council. The warrant is generated, the warrant is printed, the warrant has to be received by all Hingham residents 7 days prior to the meeting, and then the meeting takes place. We've been, over the last few years, town meeting has typically been 2 nights. It begins on the last Monday in April. If a second night is required, it's that Tuesday. If a third night is required, it's the following Monday. So this is a little bit of a sense, and while I won't go through this, I would just point out that the budget process begins in October. The warrant article process actually begins in July. This is a summary. We have, I think it's close to 40 warrant articles that town meeting is going to be considering, and we had a town volunteer who said, you know, it would really be nice if we could have a summary of all of the spending articles so we know as we're looking at all these articles, how much money are we going to be spending? And so what you see here is a list of all of the articles town meetings considered that involve spending. And in the second column, you'll see the amount of the request. And in the third column, you'll see where the money is coming from. And so what you'll notice is that for many of these articles, the money is coming from our fund balance. We have fire station renovations, which are going to involve some borrowing, and some proposed harbor improvements that may also involve borrowing. Just a point on fund balance, we have 2 kinds of fund balance as a town. We have what's called committed fund balance, which are dollars that are committed towards a project, and we have unassigned, which is really sort of the rainy day portion of the fund. In many cases, we use our committed fund balance to pay for projects. For example, if you look at Article DD, which is called harbor improvements, we collect mooring fees. Our harbor master collects mooring fees, and those accumulate in our fund balance. And they accumulate so that we can then use those monies to make improvements to the harbor and to the waterways. So this is an example where we, in the collection of mooring fees, we then take those funds and we use them and we pretty much invest them right back into the harbor. The total of these spending articles, and you know, some of these numbers may change a little bit leading up to town meeting, it's about $4.6 million of spending articles. Now that's on top of about $100 million represented in Article 6, which is the budget and the capital budget. So this year, town meeting is going to be considering expenditures, you know, around $105 million. So, you know, as we think about people having the ability to influence their community and their services, attendance and voting at town meeting really does make a difference. And a lot of times we tend to think about, you know, the budget article as being the one place where a lot of financial commitments are made, but there are many others. And I think we would encourage all citizens to participate and engage in town meeting, because oftentimes very significant decisions are being made, and there are times when some of those margins of votes are quite slim. So really, every voice is heard at town meeting. And as we can see from this slide, there's a lot of dollars at stake. So we had a few questions from members of the league about some specific warrant articles. So I'd just like to take a few minutes and run through those, and again invite any additional questions. The first one is a big one. It says, could you review the transfers in and out of various funds? If you oftentimes look at your list of warrant articles, you'll see transfer into the stabilization fund, transfer out of the reserve fund, and then sometimes you'll see transferring money into one fund and then a different amount to transfer it out of that same account. And, you know, kind of what's going on. So we really have three different types of funds. So the first one is called the Reserve Fund, and that's Article M. And Article M is basically asking the town to transfer. So every year at town meeting, we have to close the year with a balanced budget. So just to give you an example, this year in our budget, we have a budget for snow and ice removal of $550,000, which represents the 10-year average. We worked our way through that by about the middle of January. Right now, our snow and ice removal is, it's more than $1 million. And that doesn't include any of the costs associated with clearing snow from roofs of buildings. It doesn't include any of the overtime that was incurred by town departments to sort of monitor the square during the demolition of the Lincoln building. So we're going to close the fiscal year with a deficit primarily driven by snow and ice. And basically, Mass General Law says you can't do that. So what this article gives us the ability to do is to take money out of our rainy day fund so that we can balance the budget for the year. And so typically this is an article where we oftentimes try not to vote this article until pretty close to town meeting because we want it to be as accurate as we possibly can. I'd also mention that the advisory committee each year when town meeting votes the budget, it votes an annual amount of about $550,000 that we on the advisory committee use for unanticipated and extraordinary expenses during the year. So as an example, when FEMA issued those new flood insurance rates, we as a town thought it was really important to try to fight that. And so we incurred some costs in doing that. That was something that wasn't budgeted at the beginning of the year. So as an advisory committee with the Board of Selectmen, we voted to transfer some money for that activity. So again, as the fiscal year is closing, if we still have money left in that reserve fund, we're okay. But again, in a year like this year with such extraordinary snow and ice removal, we will need to take money out of our rainy day fund to balance the budget. And the hope would be that perhaps next year we see a surplus in the operating budget and we return those funds. Are there any questions about this article? Okay. So then the next one was revolving funds. And Massachusetts general law, it's actually section 53E.5, says that certain town departments can establish a revolving fund for specific purposes. But they kind of put a caveat on that. They say you can have this, but every year you have to have town meeting agree to keep it going. So the reason that you see these articles every year in town meeting is because they're required by Mass General Law. And we have two of them. Article K is a building department revolving fund. So a homeowner takes out a building permit to put an addition on their house. They pay money, they pay a building permit fee. That money goes into the building department revolving account. When that homeowner needs an electrical inspection or a plumbing inspection or a building inspection, the person performing that inspection is paid out of this revolving fund. So what we're trying to do again is there's a very specific purpose here, which is for building inspections. And so what we do as a town is this article, we typically set a limit on it. So we say for building inspections, we can withdraw up to $250,000 from that account. When this came before the advisory committee, we looked at the 10-year trend to make sure that that limit was reasonable, and it was. We also have a revolving fund for elder services. And so again, if a senior pays for a program offered by the senior center, that goes into the revolving fund. And let's say it's maybe some sort of a seminar at the senior center. The cost associated with delivering that seminar are paid out of that revolving fund. So that's how revolving funds work. And again, you will see articles K and L every year at town meeting, because town meeting is required to approve them every year to keep them going. I would also mention that for people who are, that we also have revolving funds in the school department. So if you rent a building at the school department, or a sports team rents one of the athletic fields, the school department also has revolving funds, and what they do is they apply those to their budget. So when we on the advisory committee look at a school department budget, it is actually a net number from offsets of revolving funds. Any question on that one? Okay, this is the hard one. Stabilization funds. So a stabilization fund, when I went and looked this up, it said it's a mechanism for setting aside money for any lawful municipal purpose. So now, once I had that clarity, it is, these were originally intended to be for capital projects, but my understanding is they've been broadened over time. An important thing is at town meeting, a 2/3 vote is required to put money into a fund or to take it out. And we have a couple of these. Article G is an article that we will see for another few years. And this is a transfer of money from a stabilization fund that was set up when the former school administration building, municipal light plant, and police station buildings were sold. So when the town sold those buildings, we got some money for those buildings. And what we said was, okay, what we're going to do with that is we're going to set up a stabilization fund, and every year we're going to apply a portion of those proceeds to reduce the tax rate. So that was the plan, which was, so we set aside the money, and the idea was to be able to return those proceeds from the sale of a town asset to taxpayers, but do it over time. For this year, we're transferring $65,413. And so, you know, said another way, if this stabilization fund wasn't in place, our treasurer collector would be collecting that much more dollars in taxes. You probably, as you think about stabilization, the meals tax stabilization fund is the one that you may hear a little bit more about. In 2010, you may recall that that was a time when we were really in the throes of the recession. We were really, a lot of communities were really, were struggling, the state was struggling, and the state gave communities a tool. And the tool was the ability to collect meals tax on meals served by restaurants and eating establishments within the community. I seem to remember at town meeting that there was a lot of discussion, and this narrowly passed. And at the time, we thought it would generate, we had gotten some estimates from the Department of Revenue, and they said, yeah, Hingham, we think you would collect about $250,000 a year. We said, well, okay, it's great. And as we were setting this up, there was a lot of feeling from the community and a lot of feeling from the policy boards, the Board of Selectmen, as well as the Advisory Committee, that what we didn't want to do with this money is just roll it into our operating budgets. We said, let's set this money aside and let's use it for extraordinary expenses. like maybe a big capital project. And so that's what we started doing. In 2010, we said, we're going to collect this meals tax money and we're going to put it into the stabilization fund. And in 2011, our annual town meeting approved the creation of the fund and started transferring the money in. And what was interesting was, instead of it being about $250,000 a year, it's about $600,000 a year. And it's getting a little bit greater. So over the past few years, this fund has been accumulating. So in 2012, 2/3 vote of town meeting put money in. 2013, 2/3 town meeting put money in. That was also around the time when the middle school was being built. And the thought was, let's use the meals tax money to reduce the taxpayer impact of the middle school. It's a pretty large capital project. And by the way, this was around the same time that as a community, we wanted to expand our senior tax work-off program. We have a program where qualifying seniors can receive a $1,000 reduction on their property taxes for participating in a work-off program. And basically, we wanted to make more funds available to do that. So what we did in 2013 was we put money in, but then we also took some money out to reduce the taxpayer impact of the middle school and to expand the tax work-off program. Last year at town meeting, we decided to designate meals tax revenue as a local receipt. And the reason for doing that was the middle school debt is over a period of about 20, the middle school is financed for 20 years. We said, well, so we could for 20 years transfer money in and then transfer money out. Why not just treat it as a local receipt and we don't have to do that? So last year's town meeting designated ongoing meals tax revenue as a local receipt, and it also transferred more money out of the stabilization fund to reduce this year's tax rate. So again, we are, our taxes went up as a community by $450,000 less than they would have because of this meals tax. So what's going to happen this year in the 2005 town meeting is that we will be transferring last year's meals tax money into the stabilization fund, and that's the last time we're going to see that article. And then we're going to transfer $450,000 out to reduce the fiscal 16 tax rate. So what's going to happen is our meals tax stabilization fund right now, I think it has a balance of just over $2 million. What we're going to do is for the next few years until it's depleted, we're going to pull out $450,000 each year. And so again, the purpose of that is to mitigate the taxpayer impact of the middle school. Any questions on that one? So there were some other questions that people had, and I'll just speak to each of these. Article QQ is a transfer, potential land swap, and this relates to the Hingham Municipal Light Plant parcel that's located on Cushing Street. This article has not been heard yet, either by the Board of Selectmen or by the Advisory Committee. My understanding is that that Article QQ, the transfer to the Board of Selectmen, will take place. But what I would say is, in general, any time that there is a swap or anything involved with real estate matters for the town, it requires town meeting a town meeting vote. Article T is accessory dwellings, and some of you may have seen during the course of the fall there was an accessory unit study committee that was charged with looking at potentially modifying the zoning bylaw to in some way address accessory dwellings. So this would be you know, an in-law apartment or some sort of a dwelling that, some sort of an accessory dwelling. This is a committee that had a big task to do in a really short period of time. Zoning warrant articles are due on January 1st. And this committee, as it was doing its work, it realized in January that they still felt like they had some work to do and said, you know what, we want to do this right and not be rushed by the deadline of town meeting. So a decision was made to withdraw this article for this year. Our understanding is that the great work by this committee is going to continue. And this is going to be something as a community that is going to require consideration as we look. Right now, our largest demographic here in Hingham is our over 65 population. And our senior center did a wonderful study a few years ago, and one of the greatest concerns of seniors who live here in Hingham is being able to continue to live in this community where many of them have lived their entire lives. So this question of accessory dwellings is one that is going to continue, but it won't be considered by this year's town meeting. Article N is the Torrent or the North Fire Station. I think it's also called Station Number 2. You may recall last year that town meeting voted to purchase 2 new fire engines. And we talked about how there was a committee called the Fire Asset Review Committee. This was a committee made up of members of our Hingham firefighting team as well as citizen volunteers. And what they were charged with doing is to say, what are our current and future needs for fire and emergency management services, both in terms of vehicles and in terms of facilities. And so what this committee did is they really took a very holistic view, and they said, they started and said, if you had no fire stations and no fire equipment in Hingham today, where would you put fire stations? What kind of equipment would you have? And so I think some of you may have seen in the Hingham Journal that there is talk about the potential for a 4th fire station in South Hingham. This committee has concluded that they are recommending the construction of a 4th fire station in South Hingham. That's not something that's being considered for this year's town meeting. What is being considered is the Torrent Fire Station, which was built and opened in 1942, has some of its original systems. It is badly in need of renovation. Heating systems, plumbing, pretty much all of the major systems. In addition, this particular station, when it was built in 1942, had the 2 bays for the fire trucks. Well, we all know that our Fire and Emergency Management Services Department now does a great deal of other things, ambulance service, so they have other equipment needs. So this warrant article is actually seeking $500,000 to design a renovated fire station number 2 so that next year town meeting will consider the construction costs for this fire station. And I think it's important to note with this that the Fire Asset Review Committee, as they were forming their recommendations, they did it with the entire town in mind. So their position is this fire station is ideally located. Whether or not you do a 4th station or not, this is the right location for this station. This is a busy station. I think it handled 1,800 calls last year. This fire station needs to be renovated and slightly expanded. So I think there was a question from a league member as to how this fits with the concept of a 4th fire station. This is really the first step in a 3-step plan. Step 1, renovate the North Torrent Fire Station. Steps 2 and 3 would involve the consideration of a 4th station, as well as renovations to the Constitution Fire Station, which was also built in 1942 and has some of the same issues with respect to its systems and needs for upgrades. Kathy, question?
Just a question. You said
Use
earlier.
the mic, please.
Oh, Kathy, could you please come up to the mic?
Oh. Okay. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, please.
You were telling us the fiscal, the spending articles, and
Yep.
what is, for the fire station for the Torrent? What is the?
$500,000.
Okay,
And the idea is that that would be non-excluded debt.
okay, thank you.
Yep. So someone else asked a question about Article LL, which is an article, it's to amend one of the Hingham general bylaws. This is an article that's going to require a majority vote, but this is, and I hope I say this right, this would ban single-use plastic bags in Hingham beginning April 1st, 2016. So this would be an article that would, if it was passed by town meeting, there would be about a year's period. It would also allow retailers to charge 10 cents for a paper bag, so long as that paper, and keep that money, so long as the paper bag had a certain recyclable content to it. So this is an effort, it's being put forward by our long-range waste and recycling committee, and this is really an effort to consider the environmental impact, particularly of those single-use plastic bags. The Board of Selectmen will be hearing this article tomorrow night. The advisory committee will be hearing it next week. And again, that applies to the single-use plastic bags. So my understanding is, if you go to the Gap and you buy a pair of jeans and they give you a little fancier plastic bag with a drawstring, that is not going to be affected by this. It's more the single-use bags that primarily you get at grocery stores. And further, I believe that the plastic bags are the ones to carry materials. So a plastic bag for cold cuts or something like that, again, would be excluded from Article LL. We also received a question about Article P, which is the town administrator bylaw. The genesis of this article actually began 6 or 7 years ago when the town was hiring a town administrator. We were working with a personnel consultant to try to attract high caliber candidates to Hingham, and the consultant said to us, you're not going to be able to get the highest caliber people because the responsibilities of your town administrator aren't as formalized as they are in other places. And the town we took that information, and we were also, we took that information, and then it was actually picked up on a little bit by the Government Study Committee, who looked and said and made some recommendations with respect to town administrator responsibilities, and also said, perhaps the town might want to consider at a future time moving to a charter or a town manager role. And so, as with the case with many things in Hingham, there's sometimes the seeds that are planted for the need for a warrant article. And so this year, the Board of Selectmen convened a committee to draft a bylaw that would codify the town administrator responsibilities. And I was fortunate to, as chair of the advisory committee, have an appointment to that committee. That committee is made up of Nelson Ross, Tom Carey, David Pace, and Karen Johnson, with great support from Betty Foley, our assistant town administrator. And they have been working very hard since November to develop a bylaw that would define the town administrator responsibilities. And this is an article that the Board of Selectmen have heard once. The advisory committee has heard a report. The Board of Selectmen are going to hear, and I believe vote this tomorrow. We will hear it next week. In the bylaw committee's report to the advisory committee, they are recommending responsibilities that are fairly in line with what's been our practice in recent years, but they also point out that Mass General Law prohibits prohibits them from going as far as they would like to go, and are suggesting that at a future date the town again may want to consider forming a charter which would, you know, or special legislation that would allow us to have a town manager position. So again, as with many things in our community, this is something that has been evolving. This year town meeting will have the opportunity to say, do we want to advance it another step? This may be something that will continue to evolve as the town evolves. Before I go on to resources, we had two other questions. One was on Article B, which is to assume the liability for the for DCR on rivers, harbors, and this is we call this a perennial article. This is again one that we have to have in town every year, and essentially what this article says is that if Hingham ever wants the Department of Conservation and Recreation to come in and do any work in Hingham, we have to assume the liability for any property damages that they may incur in doing it. And this is basically a way for the Department of Conservation and Recreation to transfer any liability from their organization to a community. If we didn't pass this article and we needed the DCR resources, they wouldn't come. So this is, again, it is an annual article that comes before town meeting. There was also a question about Article TT, which is a school bus lease. Here in Hingham, we lease school buses. We have 21 school buses. They transport Hingham school students to and from school. They are also buses that are used to transport student athletes and student organizations to, you know, various, you know, a concert, an athletic event, and our current lease is up. And so what town meeting requires, town meeting has to approve any lease greater than 3 years. And that's a lease for anything. And so what the school department would like to do is they would like to put the leasing of school buses out to bid, but they'd like to do it for a 5-year period because they believe that they can get more favorable pricing. So this is an article that comes up at times when leases are up for renewal. And what it also allows the town to do by leasing the buses, it gives us the ability to make sure that our buses are a little newer. And to the extent if there were ever any changes, for example, seat belts on buses, that would give us some flexibility where we wouldn't have, you know, 21 buses that no longer, you know, are in compliance. Ann?
Ann Fanton. Could you clarify Article Q, which is engineering services for Route 3A, Rotary, and Summer Street? Will that be developing design concepts or just meeting our town allocation so that we'll qualify for state improvements when they're ready to do them? And could you also clarify again the plastic bags? You mentioned, I was thinking of clothing stores, you mentioned tying with a bow. There are certainly some elegant single-use plastic bags, and I wondered what you meant by the ones that weren't included.
I'll answer the second question first, and I'll pull out the spotlight. I apologize if my description wasn't clear. The idea here is to reduce the use of disposable checkout bags. So a checkout bag is a bag that's provided by a retail establishment for the purpose of transporting the purchases. So you go to the fruit center, you get 6 things, they put it in one of those plastic bags. That is what this article seeks to reduce. And the second question is Article Q, which is engineering services for Route 3A, the Rotary, and Summer Street. This is actually a citizen petition article, and it has come from some residents who live near that Rotary, and they are coming to the town really primarily for reasons of safety. We actually had a very informative and compelling presentation last night from the citizens giving us the history, particularly of the traffic record. And I think Mass DOT recently classified that rotary in a category that said the incidence rate of accidents was significant. And you may recall that a few years ago, Governor Patrick came down to the rotary and talked about how state funds were going to be applied to try to really sort of improve the roadway, the 3A roadway, really going from, you know, the Lobster Pound up to about, you know, George Washington Boulevard. And shortly after that time, this was also a time when the town was seeking transportation money to improve the Derby Street corridor. Shortly after Governor Patrick's visit, the town was asked by the state to prioritize. The state pretty much said, we can probably do one of these, but we can't do them both. The Board of Selectmen at the time prioritized the Derby Street corridor improvements. And at that time said to the community, and our hope is that we would be able to address what we know is a problematic area. So what this money would do is, it's approximately $400,000, and it would basically design the roadway, and that would position the town better for state funding. And so essentially the way I like to think about it is, as the state is looking at prioritizing transportation projects, if they see that a community has invested some of its own funds, that's kind of a signal to them of seriousness and commitment from a community. And while it doesn't guarantee any sort of funding, it better positions the town. So the idea would be that the town would expend these funds, and that the construction of any roadway improvements would be funded by the state, because that's actually a state road. Does that answer the question? Are there any other questions about any of the other articles? I'd just like to point out a couple of resources that are going to be helpful to people. The Town of Hingham website, and there's an event calendar, and it lists dates of all the board meetings, it lists agendas, and you can actually sign up on the town website to have this emailed to you every Monday morning. It's very helpful, it's very convenient. I would also recommend that people check this periodically, but because particularly this year with Mother Nature, it's really caused a lot of hearings and meetings to have to be rescheduled and moved. So, you know, before you come down to Town Hall, please check the event calendar to make sure your meeting is happening, your item is on the agenda. The advisory committee also has a page on the town website, and what we do on a weekly basis is we update our calendar, our budget scorecard, which is an internal working document, and our warrant article summary status. And this gives people an idea of when the advisory committee is hearing articles. It's also a snapshot to just show, did the Board of Selectmen vote this? What was their vote? Did the advisory committee vote it? What was their vote? And also on our page, we actually also have the League's Citizens Guide to Town Meeting, which is a very helpful resource, and we're very grateful to the League for providing that. I'll just close by saying, you know, when I first came to Hingham, I moved from a place that did not have an open town meeting. And the first time I went to town meeting, I was really struck by the impact that the citizens sitting in the chairs had on so many decisions that affected the town, not just for the next year, but going into the future. And you know, there are always plenty of chairs at town meeting, and we really do hope that everyone participates, because really the choices we make affect our future and they affect our town. And we sincerely hope that everyone not only participates in hearings on warrant articles leading up to town meeting, but also comes to town meeting. I'd also just mention one other thing, which is that over the next several weeks, the Hingham Journal will be very helpful resource, because they oftentimes run They run stories and they describe warrant articles. So that's another great source of information for people if you want to understand more about any of the warrant articles. Are there any final questions? Thank you very much to the League.
And thank you, Mary, for a very informative session. And I hope this encourages our viewers to come to some of the hearings and have their voices heard before town meeting, and of course attend town meeting on April the 27th. Thank you again.
Thank you.